Hi. Thank you so much for coming. We got one. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. We're delighted to see all of you here. My name is Roy Kesey. I'm the Associate Director of the Lit House. I'm a fiction writer and a translator and a professor in the English department, and I will be your MC for the evening. So it's been a week. Huh? I'm reminded of the lines from Beckett's The Unnameable. I can't go on. I'll go on. You've probably heard those lines before. I also picked a watch for tonight in that same spirit. You can't see it from where you are, but it's a trench watch from World War I, and it still keeps good time. And I figured that if it can keep doing its job, right, if it can keep doing the things that it was made to do, meant to do, that I guess I can, and I guess we all can, watching each other's backs, we can go on. More to the point, I was lucky enough to be one of 5 Washington College staff and faculty to join in the reboot of Kiplin Hall, an iconic study abroad program in Northern England. That program was initially funded by former Washington College President Jay Griswold and envisioned, built, and administered by Dr. Rich Gillen, who's here with us tonight, and his wife, Barbara. Dr. Gillen will be sharing a few thoughts in a bit. For the moment, I just want to say thank you, Rich, for creating this program that has changed. This program that has changed and enriched the lives of so many Washington College students over the 20-plus years that you and Barbara were in charge. The early years of COVID put a temporary hold on the Kiplin Hall trip, but it has since been revived, reimagined, re-envisioned. On our pilot trip this past June, my 4 co-conspirators, if you wouldn't mind waving, Professor Adam Goodhart, the Hudson Trust Griswold Director of the CV Star Center for the Study of the American Experience, hereinafter the Star Center, Dr. Victoria Barnett Woods, Associate Director of Experiential Learning and Program Development at the Star Center, Dr. Beth Choate, Deputy Director at the Center for Environment and Society, hereinafter CES, and Mackenzie Brady from the Office of Marketing and Communication, hereinafter Marcom. You all witnessed Mackenzie's beautiful photography of the trip on the screen up here before we started, and likely also on college social media accounts during the trip. Please keep an eye out for her terrific articles in the next issue of the Washington College Alumni Magazine, including one about the Kiplin Hall trip itself. The Kiplin Hall Study Abroad program is still housed in the English department as ever. The program director is our colleague, Dr. Katie Charles, but it is now multidisciplinary, involving all 3 of Washington College's signature centers, CES, the Star Center, and the Lit House. And here to tell you more about that is Dr. Beth Choate. Beth.
So I just want to say this program is certainly one of the many experiential learning opportunities that you will find here at Washington College. So we recently presented at a conference where I really talked about the value of place-based learning, experiential learning on students, right? It's actively engaged hands-on learning, really strengthens student learning and understanding. And it increases engagement, and suddenly you feel more connected to the things that you're learning in a classroom, right? And I think some of our students are going to talk a little bit about that. So, as Roy mentioned, this new iteration of Kiplin Hall brings together the English department, the 3 signature centers, with the goal of weaving together history, environment, and literary disciplines, and using those lenses to really understand the place that is Northern England. And think about our connections to here, right? To the Chesapeake Bay region, to Maryland, and to the US. And so we did a lot of those connecting as well. A little bit, we can go to the next one. You covered that part. Rich wrote a fabulous book on this, by the way, which you shall read. Next slide. So it's 3 centers are involved. We came back, next slide, some good pictures though. we decided as we were developing this new program and figuring out how do you bring all of it together, right? It's a lot of different disciplines coming together. We set some pretty lofty goals and objectives for this course. One, read and engage with British and transatlantic literature. 2, establish an understanding of those transatlantic connections between Maryland and the various sites in northern England that we visited. You're going to hear a lot more about those. Observe those environmental contexts throughout the trip and really explore the ways in which the human and non-human worlds interact to shape one another. Engage with travel writing as an art and practice while moving through those spaces. Explore the connection between the away experience and the academic program and studies here at Washington College. And last but certainly not least, appreciate the beauty of nature, possibly experience the sublime as we hike through the footsteps of the English Romantics. And I think we did a lot of those things. It was an amazing trip. We crammed a lot in. So I'm going to just take you through how this worked, where we went and traveled, so that you have some background before our students come up and talk about give you their reflections on this. So we were gone June 1st through 8th. So we crammed a lot into a very short period of time because it takes a day to get to England. And we flew from Philadelphia to Manchester, England, arriving on June 2nd, where we hopped into 2 rented vans driven by Vicky and I, first time driving on the other side of the road. It was an adventure. And we did a lot of driving throughout northern England, right? So here's what you're looking at in our map here. So we drove from Manchester all the way up to the Kiplin Hall estate, where we stayed in these amazing, they were deemed eco-lodges, little cottages, where the students stayed together in one, the staff next door in 2 others. And the really amazing thing about this experience is we got to mimic what the original Kiplin Hall trip did, which was at the end of the day, we all came together. 2 students were in charge of cooking a fabulous meal, and we ate together, and we reflected, and we talked about the hikes and what we had experienced throughout the day, and it was beautiful. So on our first day, so we went up to Kiplin Hall, and we spent the first 2 days over in the Lake District. The first day visiting Grasmere and Dove Cottage and reading Wordsworth, and Michael in the place where it was written, which was beautiful and amazing. We went back over to Kiplin Hall. You have to see the map so you can get an idea of all the back and forth. Lots of roundabouts happening. So we went back, spent the evening at Kiplin Hall, came back out and went to the the World of Beatrix Potter attraction, which we do not recommend. We will not make the trip, the second trip. But we do want to study Beatrix Potter because she's a fascinating individual. It's not that. So, and then we went to Storrs Hall, where we had a very interdisciplinary conversation that I know Annabella's going to talk about, so I'm not going to say any more about that. We then went back to Kiplin Hall and then down south to the Bronte Parsonage, where we hiked the moors and we read some poetry by Emily Bronte at the top, and we let the wind whip through our hair, and some of us screamed. And we looked at the bugs and talked about the carbon carrying capacity of the moors, and looked at those ecosystems, and it was a beautiful time. And then we headed south to Manchester, where we went to the Quarry Mill Museum and learned what it was like to be in a mill and work in those conditions at that time. So we did a lot of traveling. We crammed a lot into 7 days, and I won't say too much. I don't think I'll say anything else about that adventure. I'm going to let the students and their work speak for that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Now the moment you've all been waiting for, the opportunity for Washington College students who went on the trip last June to share some of the writing they did during and after our visit. Our first reader today is Annabella Golia. Annabella is a sophomore history major who works both at the Writing Center as a peer tutor and at the Starr Center as an intern doing research on history around the Chesapeake Bay. Annabella, welcome up.
Hi. So I'm going to start with a unfinished poem that I wrote while in the moors, titled Unfinished Poem from the Moors. Cattails nod in the breeze, like schools of minnows jumping upstream. The grass shivers in the whistling wind alongside me. Branches of bushes catch at my legs and prickle my skin. The ground is spongy and mossy, a soft layer before the dirt. Birds flap in the air, but do not move forward. The sun peeks out for just a minute before going back inside. So, that's the poem. And then I'll read just a section of my conference paper that I presented last weekend about one specific day when we went to Storrs Hall, as mentioned before. On Tuesday, June 4th of this year, our Washington College Kiplin Hall research group traveled through the cold and rain to see historic Storrs Hall in Windermere, England, roughly 2 hours north of Manchester. It was an ugly building with plain stone walls and prison-like windows, made even uglier by the knowledge that it was once owned by slave trader John Bolton, who purchased the hall in 1808 and expanded it using the wealth he had accumulated off the backs of his enslaved laborers who produced commodities such as sugar and rum in the West Indies. As it turned out, its grand outer walls were as whitewashed as its history. During the foggy drive to Windermere, a carload of us read aloud an article which appeared in the Northwest Bylines in August of 2023 entitled, "Is Windermere Whitewashing Its History of Slavery?" Written by Paul Goldsworth, a former employee of the nearby Windermere Lake Cruises Company. In his article, Goldsworth exposed both his former employers and the owner of Storrs Hall for their attempts to suppress the building's past connections to the slave trade. In April 2020, skippers working for Windermere Lake Cruises were instructed to refrain from informing passengers of the full story of Storrs Hall and effectively misrepresent John Bolton as a respectable man, a successful businessman, not a notorious slave owner, expunging all mentions of slavery from the narrative. Leaving out any mentions of slave ownership, and to instead misrepresent Bolton as an upstanding businessman. That's repeated. The company claimed that the change occurred in response to customer complaints about slavery discussion. Yet, given this decision was made just weeks after the murder of George Floyd and subsequent reignition of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the fact that only one customer complaint about the subject could be found amongst thousands of positive reviews, the company's explanation was dubious. Windermere Lake Cruises later admitted, via mass email to its employees, that the change in boat tour information happened at the request of Storrs Hall's owner, who was denied such involvement. The blatant erasure of Bolton's connection to the slave trade prompted Holdsworth to leave the Lake Windermere Cruises Company. In fairness to Storrs Hall, their official website now makes mention of Bolton's involvement with the slave trade on its homepage. It reads, quote, "Storrs is bought by John Bolton, an Ulverston-born, Liverpool-based merchant who makes his fortune in the Africa trade, including slavery. In a dichotomy that is abhorrent to us in the 21st century, he was regarded as a pillar of society by his peers who had no qualms in reconciling his trade with his place and influence in the society of the day." End quote. The disclaimer runs only 2 sentences long amidst a long page detailing the building's history. The passage minimizes Bolton's involvement with slavery by listing it as just one aspect of his business with the Africa trade, rather than as his main method of profit. The passage implies that dealing in the slave trade was normalized in Bolton society, but this ignores the many people who ardently opposed slavery, even in the early 19th century. Storrs Hall's disclaimer does not adequately address its connections to slavery. Denied access to the property and constantly fearful of being escorted off the grounds, our group stood in the rain and took it upon ourselves to properly discuss the part the slave trade played in England's prosperity. We talked about the exponential wealth Great Britain accumulated through slave-made goods imported from the Americas. We talked about the ocean-wide distance between the African slave in America and the white slave owner in Britain. We talked about England's process of reparations after Britain outlawed the slave trade in 1834, wherein the state paid slave owners for each enslaved person let go to make up for potential profits lost. Then we looked across the estate, which encapsulated so much of Britain's history with slavery, in silence. The full extent of the complex motivations behind the decision to exclude mentions of slavery from boat tours can only be guessed at, but conversations with Kiplin Hall curator Alice Rose revealed that England, in many ways, is still struggling to acknowledge the more unpleasant sides of its history. Decolonization efforts are in the early stages in many places, and the stories of people from historically marginalized groups are only beginning to come to light. The curators of Kiplin Hall itself, they're trying to incorporate the less glamorous and Anglo-centric aspects of the hall's past into their exhibits. They want to acknowledge the fact that many of the building's materials were likely sourced from places in the Americas operating on slave labor, and that the hall's original owners, the Calverts, were colonizers who impeded on Native American territory despite being mainly known as the founders of what is now the state of Maryland. Much of England seems to be similarly in the planning phase in the decolonization process. This all makes me wonder how many stories from anywhere in the world go untold. England is not the only place guilty of suppressing history. What other aspects of history might we still be ignoring? And that's where I'm going to stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabella. That was great. That moment of conversation at Storrs Hall was one of my favorite moments of the trip. It was one of the moments when all of the multidisciplinary aspects came together in a conversation that felt thorough and heartfelt and important, and I'm glad everybody got to hear about it. Our second reader today is Quinn Hammond. Quinn is a junior English major, minoring in creative writing and art/art history. As you probably already know, his hometown of Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, is the mushroom capital of the world. Quinn, welcome.
Thank you. Okay. I also have a poem to read and a portion of my essay from the conference from last weekend. This poem also was written in the Moors in my journal, and then rewritten and revised over the last couple of months, and it is called Untitled Poem from Haworth. If I were Branwell, my name in my lungs condemned to dissolve, my face fated to be obscured by my own hand, how I would have longed to die here, buried in the wind, curls suspended in air like roots reaching for soil, fingers limp like dry leaves on quivering branches. I ought to let myself be caught in the sky, to watch my own story reflected in quarry basins. I'll drown in this purple plateau of leather-like grasses. In the pool of water that dilutes the sky into brown, I meet my eyes on the surface, see the pupils smear across my face. There's the wind. This water juts deeper than the telephone poles. It swallows the clouds and the wires and the histories that permeate like groundwater. If I was to drain this quarry, I might find his bones, displaced from their coffin by the sheer force of the moor. But I'll let Branwell rest for now. Instead, I'll let the moors wash over me, pressed to the ground like the wind-matted branches. I run my fingers through heather as though through my own hair. It isn't so cold when earth's fur envelops me. I'll submerge myself in dirt like warm water. If I sink into scenery, I'll meet Branwell at this mountain's core. I'll be the grass, tangled with myself and perpetually unsettled, absorbed in the air that history itself once knew. Thank you. Okay, and then this is just an excerpt of my essay. Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre and Emily's Wuthering Heights, both published in 1847 by the sisters under masculine pen names, have survived for centuries as classic works of Gothic romance. Both novels explore concepts of familiar bonds and histories and are set in immense and mysterious manners, threatened by the ghosts of past lovers and haunted by hidden secrets. But even having read both of these novels and studied the Bronte sisters extensively in 2 classes, Haworth and the Bronte Parsonage Museum had more to offer than I thought to imagine. Being immersed in the world of the Brontes made their works of literature suddenly much more accessible to me. I came to understand how they lived, down to the layouts of their bedrooms and the views they saw from their windows. We walked through each of the rooms and hallways, exploring at our own pace and receiving insights from the knowledgeable employees who were stationed there. The Brontes were humanized by the knickknacks found in their home, like Charlotte's puzzle-engraved wax seal, the clothing they wore, and the way the passionate museum curators redesigned Branwell's bedroom to be chaotic and messy just the way he would have left it. The village of Haworth, in addition to being deeply charming, offered insight into the community the Bronte siblings knew, with historic graveyards, grand churches, and even the site of 3 of the 4 siblings' graves. With the help of extremely informative tour guides, we learned grisly details of the town's history, including the fact that the drinking water system had once run straight through the graveyard, bringing with it communicable diseases from the recently deceased. Walking through the Brontes' house, the authors of these canonical novels I'd read for classes suddenly became humanized in my eyes in a way that made me curious about them beyond how I'd ever thought to be before. Research, in real life for that matter, never appealed to me the way that reading novels did, but seeing the Brontes' home, similarly to Wordsworth's Dove Cottage earlier in the week, I began to view the lives and histories of these figures as a sort of story not unlike their novels. The Brontes especially had rather Gothic lives, stricken with premature death and forbidden romance. Visiting the museum, we got to see examples of the macabre drawings Branwell made in the period leading up to his death at 31. On our hike from Haworth to the neighboring moors, we saw the crossroads where Charlotte met Arthur Nichols before her father consented to let them marry. My pre-existing interest in their novels formed my interest in their lives, but the curiosity that the museum conjured about their personal histories also retroactively exploded my curiosity in their novels. I could see the connections between their home and their literary works. For example, I suddenly understood the significance of the moors to the characters in the Wuthering Heights, its capacity for violent weather and comforting strolls, and I easily projected the thoughts and emotions of their characters onto the authors themselves. The romances and traumas of Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre became much more significant to me when it dawned on me truly that they were written by real people, not so different from authors of stories published today, not even so different from myself writing stories in my free time. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Quinn. That was great. Branwell, of course, is the 4th Bronte sibling, right? I hope you finish that poem, because that's something Branwell wasn't very good at. Right? Like, he had talent. I don't know if as much talent as any of his sisters, but he had talent. He just didn't have what it takes to finish stuff. So finish stuff. Finish your stuff. Our third reader today is Logan Monteleone. Logan is a sophomore English major, minoring in JEP. She's a staff writer for The Elm, the managing editor of the Washington College Review, a peer tutor in the Writing Center, the Writer Union secretary, and the vice president of the campus garden. Logan, come on up.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Rip this out. Cough out the long. So I'm also going to read a poem about our time in Haworth. Sorry. Cobblestone roads in the backbone of England, retracing historic hoofprints of Highland ponies, the spin of wooden wheels, and the stamp of thin leather shoes with our brand new Columbia hiking boots. The uneven earth contains centuries of crumbled churches, forgotten trades, clumped up clods of soil and sheep's wool, formerly fuchsia strands of windblown heather, broken trinkets, and people. Underground, the fallen, decomposing leaves of European ash, the rotten rings of the oak, the calcified bones of merlin and grouse lie ever-growing graves of memory. The seeming incoherence of modern people living leisurely in what was once a working medieval village yields quickly to an understanding of what is only natural. Procession, continuum, time's incessant movement forward, regardless of what marks it, be it sunshade, bell tower, or wristwatch. Okay, and then likewise a bit of my essay. I think the promise of a hike along Greenhead Gill, the narrow mountain stream from which William Wordsworth drew inspiration for the setting of his classic pastoral Michael, and an invitation to explore Dove Cottage, the ivy-clambered stone dwelling where works from lyrical ballads to the beginnings of the prelude were composed, would more than satisfy most English majors. Beyond this itinerary of a hike and a house tour, our journey to Grassmere included a stroll among the sprawling ferns and foxgloves of the Wordsworth's orchard gardens, glimmers of insight into common life in the Lake District during the late 18th century, and conversation over gingerbread and Yorkshire tea, the topic of which ranged from the logistics of our afternoon hike to the sublimity of the natural world. Though I would have been plenty satisfied had our visit been defined by these opportunities alone, it just so happened, as I think a romantic poet would agree it often does, that the most meaningful experience I had was one I didn't expect. A lecture, lesson, and guided manuscript workshop in the Wordsworth Grassmere Center with its principal curator and head of learning, Jeff Coutman. It was an unusually sunny day in the north of England, such as made the idea of delaying our hike to spend time indoors a slightly unattractive one, but it was during the workshop on that first day of our trip where I occupied a space with manuscripts of the works that have shaped me as an English student and an individual that I experienced the awe and wonder necessary to fully appreciate the rest of our journey. From the archive that contains 90% of William's manuscripts and some of the rarest, earliest editions of classic literature and poetry from the Wordsworth's contemporaries, our group had the opportunity to interact with numerous texts, in addition to learning many of the fascinating personal histories that surround each work. The manuscripts that made the largest impression on me were the various early editions of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem Christabel and a selection of Dorothy Wordsworth's journals. As a contextual note for my interest in the Christabel manuscripts, I was introduced to the 1817 Gothically influenced narrative poem during Dr. Gillen's first-year seminar course on English Romanticism in the fall prior to our trip. Coupling my interest in its interpretation, as inspired by the course, with an admiration for the romantically rendered elements of Gothic storytelling, from foreboding animal calls and chiming midnight clocks to majestic castles and nighttime encounters in oak-filled forests, it was with deeply seated awe that I listened to Jeff's lecture on Christabel in the workshop, and it was with something like a stupor that I held up my hands to receive the volume he placed in my open palms. I admired the book's cloth-bound cover, the color of creamy English tea, and I delighted in the book's narrow width and apparent weightlessness in comparison to the Norton anthology in which I first encountered it. Immediately as I began to read, I noticed that the first stanza was not the same as the version of the poem I was familiar with. The first line of the edition in the archive reads, "Each matin bell, the Baron saith, melds us back to a world of death." In the anthologized 1816 version of Christabel, however, which it's interesting to note that Coleridge wrote and revised over a period of numerous years beginning in 1798, it is not until over 300 lines into the poem that the opening stanza from the archived edition appears. Jeff also introduced us to an even earlier version of Coleridge's Christabel, housed in an unlikely place. The full text written between the lines of William's travel journal, it was incredible to consider that Coleridge's work shares not just a metaphoric but a physical space with that of his companion poet. Can I get a crystal time? Maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Logan. That was great. I love how the students are all hitting the biggest, best spots we got to. And I love the reference to Coleridge revising, right? We don't think about the canonic figures putting in time to get the words right, but of course they did, right? Of course they had to. So revise your stuff, finish it, and then revise. Okay. Our fourth reader today is Kiplin Caitlin is a senior majoring in history with a minor in museum, field, and community education. She's from Chatham, New Jersey, and most importantly, she has a 2-year-old dog named Junie. Caitlin, welcome.
Hello everyone. So today I'm reading a poem from the Moors. When we were in the Moors, we were instructed to write a piece that discussed the Moors, but without talking about it, like saying it was beautiful, it was pretty. We had to shy away from that. So here's my poem. I sit on the moors, a throne of heather and wheat around me. Alone, but not really. Friends and plants and homes circle me on top of a hill, the valleys below. The wind a hug around my heart and soul. The water blue below the top, twinkling and glistening, soft waves moving across the surface. A bird dips low, its wing carrying it on its journey. A feeling of gratitude for this place to exist, but also sadness lingers as I think of leaving this home. I speak these words out loud, the wind carrying them on, the story never ending. Okay, like the rest, I will read a piece from my conference paper, but only a section of it. It was our first full day in the UK, and we had just spent the morning exploring the grounds of Dove Cottage, the home of the poet William Wordsworth and diarist Dorothy Wordsworth. Immersing ourselves in their actual journals, reading pieces of poems they wrote, noticing the scribbled notes and doodles in the margins, and walking the grounds their own footsteps took. Walking along the grounds of Dove Cottage, I also found a black and white cat stretched out on one of the brick paths, its tail flicking back and forth along the moss-covered stones. The cat's coloring, so similar to my own cat who recently passed only a few months prior, felt almost like a message, a moment to reflect and understand the journey I was on. I immediately ran over to the cat, curling up next to it, scratching its head as it purred, the breeze blowing around us. After our tour of the Wordsworth home, we went on a hike of Greenhead Gill. We walked along a stone path, the nearby stream gurgling in rhythm with our own footsteps up the mountain. Our tour guide, Jeff Houghton, principal curator and head of learning from Dove Cottage, kept a fast pace as the rest of us ran along to keep up, eager to hear any of his stories he offered. Me peppering him with questions about museum exhibit creation and curation, hopeful for any advice that could help me in my own studies. Locals waved as we walked by, watching from the river where they were cooling off as we continued our trek upwards. We stopped at a clearing, waterfalls around us, and flowers that enveloped us in a rich, fresh scent. Many of us took out our journals, eager to reproduce the views and sights we saw, knowing though whatever we drew or wrote would never be the same as actually being there. Some wrote poems like Wordsworth, focusing on the small and mundane details of nature around us, staring at the vibrant purple foxtails and writing stanzas to accompany our sights. We read lines of poetry, the words mingling with the sounds of nature around us. Then our tour guide questioned if we would like to hike even more. I remember a rising feeling of panic. Would I be able to continue? I was still feeling a little ill after the plane, but I didn't want to disappoint the group and was curious about what the view might look like at the top of the hill. The rest of the group, the 6 students and 5 adults, seemed weary of the hike, but also excited. We decided to continue. Up we went, foot after foot, step after step, supporting one another and stopping whenever one of us needed a break. Sheep ran along the hills, little spots of white and black on the horizon. The grass was soft and acted like a cushion when we took a break to admire our progress up the hill. We sat as a group, knowing we were doing this together. Sitting on the precipice of the hill and overlooking the valleys below, we could almost imagine ourselves as Dorothy and William taking the same hike, notebooks in hand. We continued up. In a way, the landscape changed terrains. At the top there was a lake encircled with rocks and stone walls. I was awestruck, never expecting the view I would see. Hills and mountains crashed together, forming valleys, and the lush green formed a blanket across the landscape. We ran along the paths, eager for any new sight, smell, or sound. We took a picture together as a group, our arms wrapped around each other, some eyes closed from the blinding sun, a colorful assortment of hiking gear, breathing labored after the hike, but our smiles never wavering. As we boarded the plane a few days later to go back to the U.S., I began to think about what this trip meant to me. an array of memories and moments that came together to form a trip of a lifetime. Shared meals together, crammed at the table as we recounted our day's adventures, early morning lunch prep discussing the readings, sunset hikes on the Kiplin Hall grounds, frolicking across the fields, driving adventures going around way too many roundabouts, and hikes together where we trekked across beautiful terrains as a family. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. That was great. If you're noticing that the poems that are being read tonight seem to have been written in the same locale, that's because they were. And the reason that they were, I mean, there could be a lot of reasons, I guess, but one of the reasons must be that that was the one place where the instructions were that you couldn't sit with anyone else, that you had to be alone, in this space. And the linguistic parameter as well, right? That no opinions, no good, bad. Describe the thing. Be in the place and describe the thing. And that was the goal that afternoon, and I'm glad to have seen it borne so much fruit. Our fifth and final reader today is Mel Turk. Mel is a junior double majoring in anthropology and environmental studies, and double minoring in Chesapeake Regional Studies and Museum Field and Community Education. Right now they are an environmental communications intern for Kiplin Hall and Gardens, where they are working on a new children's ecology exhibit. Now, come on.
Hello. So, as Roy alluded to, I will also be reading a poem that was written over the moors. So, this is titled The Moors Above Haworth. A bird flies low over rippling heather. Lavender heads titter in the wind as the tiny aviator loses its battle with the great and golden gust. Among pale green chords, spittlebug bubbles boil like that of the mouth of a rabid dog. Small razor-edged leaves sprout from chicken feet, and the head of a single cotton flower emerges just over the hillside. The bird again rises from a bright and bulbous tuft of broad blades, blonde in the mid-noon sun. As if in jest, the wind relents, and the bird pushes furiously forward before its small body is again embraced by the eastern swell. And then I unfortunately was not able to attend the conference with everyone else last weekend, but I did write a short essay about what I found to be the most valuable part of the Kiplin experience. So, here we go. Since arriving at Washington College, I have traveled to 3 different countries and will be traveling to 2 more in the upcoming months, all in the pursuit of a liberal arts education. Most recently, I was lucky enough to go to England with an incredible group of students and faculty to run the college's iconic Kiplin Hall program for the first time in 5 years. Much of the readings we did in preparation for the trip were from the era of the English Romantics, with themes of adventure and the sublime saturating the texts. However, some of the first readings we completed were about traveling in general. I was especially influenced by Daniel Defoe's accounts of traveling through Britain and the discussion of the Grand Tour by Thomas Nugent. Defoe's argument for travel emphasized the constant change that spaces undergo, writing, "No description of Great Britain can be what we call a finished account, as no clothes can be made to fit a growing child." And Nugent writes about the historical value of travel to the mass distribution of knowledge and culture. While these concepts were present in all of my travel experiences, I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of traveling with a group of people that are all prepared to learn and be challenged and changed by the experience of travel and have intellectual discussions throughout the travel experience. In the beginning of June this summer, half of the group piled into a van outside the Casey Academic Center, chittering with excitement of an upcoming adventure. The drive to the airport was quick as we talked about what we were most excited to see and thumbed through our very thick reading packets. And pretty soon we were waiting in the airport for our flight to Dublin. We layered in Washington College sweatshirts and rain jackets in preparation for the airline and the English climates. After a quick 6 or 7 hours, we were at the Manchester airport, but still a few hours away from Kiplin Hall, located in a remote part of northern England, as you can see. Beth, Vicky, and Adam braved the left lanes, and we set off into the English countryside. Every day we started out of Northallerton for a new road trip, first north and south, first visiting the moors, then a castle, always leaving with breakfast in hand and coming home ravenous for dinner. While long drives typically aren't the most interesting parts of travel, with our cohort, the hours went by quickly thanks to high-paced discussions of our daily readings and what we expected to get out of the day ahead. We would read aloud in the car to each other, as Annabella discussed, and stop for 20 minutes to discuss before getting back to the reading at hand. We would arrive at our site for the day, excited to make connections and walk away with a new perspective. In the evenings, we would gather for dinner, cooking together in the small kitchens of our cabins down the road from Kiplin Hall, and debrief everything with enthusiasm and exhaustion. While going and seeing the different places tied to the curriculum was special, what was truly valuable was the discussions we had with each other about those places and those readings. My majors are in anthropology and environmental studies, and after doing so much traveling with my family as a child and now with school as a student, I'm interested in the anthropology of travel and tourism. I would love to study not just how travel changes places, but also how travel changes people. And I think that my experience traveling with such a dedicated group of learners was a great step towards that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Spittlebug bubbles boil. You nailed the line, by the way, which is not an easy line to get through. It's also a really good bit of description, and it's a bit of description focused on something very small, right? Which is the kind of thing that can happen when you have time to yourself in a place like that. That was marvelous. I also really enjoyed the discussions in the car, and one of the most remarkable started with Mel and Logan reading Michael on our way into grasping that first day. It was the first day. Also, I don't know what Mel was complaining about how thick the reading packet was. It was only like 1.5 inches thick, and that was mostly my fault. And they made me promise to cut it back for next year, and I promised, but I didn't mean it. I'll cut it back. I'll cut it back. It was just barely enough readings, but it was kind of heavy. I recognize that. I understand. I'll do better. I understand. Thank you to all of our. Can we get another round of applause for the readers? That was terrific. Thank you. Next, we'd like to share some information about our upcoming trip in mostly May, 2025. And for that, please help me welcome Dr. Victoria Barnett-Woods.
Hello, everybody. Before I actually dig into the 2 PowerPoint slides that are forthcoming, I want to take a step back just a little bit to provide a little bit of context for the program. I first want to, if we can I acknowledge Rich real quick?
Please.
I'd like to actually ask Rich, if you could, who has been just the legacy maker for the Kiplin Hall program, to share a story, if he can, in terms of what you have brought to the table. I know, but I want to welcome the danger just a little bit. So if you could, I also want to just acknowledge the fact that Kiplin Hall is a really remarkable place. It is the designated ancestral home of the Calvert family, which is it's got intimate connections with the state of Maryland. Which is where Washington College as an institution has important ties as a Maryland institution, and so while we are not only developing connections to the Romantics and to Greenhead Gill and to these incredible locations as we're expanding our experience of Northern England, we're also thinking about ways that Kiplin Hall as an estate, as a place, is special and unique to Washington College as an institution. So not only are we garnering not only are we exploring Northern English and garnering the relationship, and we're strengthening the relationship between Washington College and Kiplin Hall and the people who make that place special, the curators, the directors. So I just want to also acknowledge that Kiplin Hall is increasingly, it's a part of, it's the heart of what makes this program. But I'd also like to just acknowledge, I want Rich to come up here real quick before I talk about next year. Let's honor the legacy.
Thank you. When you asked me to think of something with 20 years of travel in Northern England, there was a lot to sift through. I should say my wife and I didn't intend to be doing the trip for 20 years, and I've never used illegal substances, but it was absolutely as addictive as I've heard illegal substances can be, and it was very hard not to go. I mean, there were difficult times, but it was a joy. It really was. One of the many things that came up in my kind of scanning through my own memories does not reflect very well on me. But I'll tell you the story anyway. There was a student who virtually lived here in the literary house. She was really dedicated as a student of literature, and she was big. And she said, "I want to go on a Kiplin Hall trip." And I said, that's fine. I said, "You're going to have to get yourself in shape, because it was, in those days, it was 3 weeks, for one thing. It was very demanding physically. And I said, you'll be under some pressure." "Oh, no problem, I'll be all ready." Well, she didn't do anything. But there was a place called Langdale Pike, and even the name sounds a little bit ferocious. And there was always something that would crop up at Langdale Pike on all the years we traveled there. And anyway, we got to this place, and Barbara looked at me like, "Okay, why are we back here again? We shouldn't be here. This always turns out to be difficult." And I said, "No problem." Full of myself. And anyway, we started off, and the morning was pretty good. But this girl, let me just call her Katie for the sake of, it's not a real name. She was having trouble. There was a lot of switchbacks, and it was very steep. And so Barbara said to me, "Okay, we're going to have to stop more frequently and let everybody catch up and keep everybody together." So we did, and we got to the top, we stopped and we had lunch, and the day was gorgeous. It was one of those English days you want to just cry because it's so crystal clear. And I was giving my wife a hard time. I said, "See, it isn't so bad this year." Then we got to the summit, and just as we got to the summit, and we're looking out over the Langdale Valley, and we could see Scawfell Pike and Helvell and all the big mountains in the area, it started to rain. And then it turned to hail. And then this wind came up off the Irish Sea, and the hail was pelting hard. And my wife again looked at me and said, "See?" I said, "Yeah, okay." So we started to walk down, and this girl, Katie, was having a hard time. It was mainly because it was wet. It wasn't actually icy. It was hail was building up, and the footing was not good. And as we were going down, there were a couple of places. I warned the students. I said, "There's some places where the trail is really, like 2 feet wide, and you had to be very, very alert." Anyway, as we got going, Katie increasingly had great difficulty. She was uncomfortable. We all were. I mean, it was pelting hail, and
You're really selling it, Rich.
I know. Anyway, so we kept pushing, and at a certain point, Barbara said, "Why don't you let everybody else go down, and we'll stay here, unless you want to go," kind of putting it on me. I said, "Of course not. You with Katie." So I sent everyone else down, and Katie was moving like this. And we weren't making much time, clearly. And it got wetter and colder. The wind became pretty nasty. And you couldn't look straight out. You had to look down like this because of the hail. And at one point, I was thinking to myself, "This is your fault. You're the one who said she could come." And was heaping it back on me. And the coldness was really, really getting to me. And I really, this is where it does not reflect well. I was thinking, come on, Katie, get yourself moving. And as I'm thinking this, I didn't say this to her, she sat down in the mud and the rain. And then I was a little bit panicky because there was no other way that we could get her down or us. And I bent over and I said, Katie, if you sit here, you have a really good chance of dying from exposure. And he said, there's nobody going to come rescue you. You've got to be able to do it yourself. And I felt bad about saying that, but I also, it was realistic. And anyway, we kept going, and I was shaking a lot. And Barbara said, why don't you go down? And I said, of course not, I'm going down. I'm playing this whole male role. And I wouldn't have gone anyway. And just to eclipse this, because it was painful, incredibly painful, the thing that should have taken about maybe 45 minutes was already 2 hours into, going down. We finally got to the base of the mountain, and I was really angry with myself, at myself, for what I was thinking and for what I was, I didn't complain to Katie, but internally I was in knots. And one of the glorious parts of the hikes in that area is that they have wonderful pubs with open fires. And I remember just planting myself in front of this open fire. And as I was sitting there, I thought, okay, Katie showed more courage than anyone in the entire program ever did, because this was way out of her comfort zone. And I was the one who was, internally complaining, and what came to realize that there was another dimension here that I was totally missing. Not every hike was like that. That was just one. There were a lot of hikes that were pretty demanding and very, very tired. In any case, I can't recommend the new program enough. The people who are running it really are excellent. And the living in northern England during the summer, it's like a dream. So I wish you all well.
I promise there'll be no exposure threats during your time. I also have wilderness training. All right, so thank you so much, Rich. Thank you. I would also like to, again, one more thing before diving into 2025. For those who are interested in getting a little bit more insight into Kiplin Hall as a place, the curator for Kiplin Hall is going to be visiting here. He's going to be visiting Washington College on December 3rd and December 4th, and is going to be speaking with students on December 3rd at 5 o'clock. I believe it is 5 o'clock. We'll be sending out more information about her visit. Her name is Alice Rose, and she is amazing. And so I believe somebody was speaking about decolonization. I think, Annabella, it was your talk. And so you had mentioned Alice Rose's conversation about Kiplin Hall as a place and decolonization efforts that are happening with estates, heritage locations, and it's and the battles that heritage sites are having with the legacies of slavery. And so those conversations are going to be happening. Alice is going to be there. She's going to be talking about Kiplin Hall as a place. And so I welcome everybody to join. Please be on the lookout for that, for more information that is forthcoming. And she's pretty cool as a person. There are at least 7 people in the room who can vouch for that. And so, without much further ado, information about 2025. We are a little bit ahead of the game. There'll be more information that is forthcoming in early spring. But here is what we have so far in terms of logistics. So the dates themselves are going to be Tuesday, May 20th to Saturday, May 31st. So it's a little longer than our initial trip. There's going to be 12 students this time, a little longer, a little bigger group, 12 students and 4 faculty members. So that's a little bigger. We are anticipating that it will be worth 4 credits housed in the English department. So it is going to be, it's taking the toolkit that we had for the research group in 2024. We're expanding it to think more, to have it be a credit-bearing course for the summer of 2025. It's open to all majors. There are no prerequisites for it. We are still working out the kinks for the cost. We are anticipating around $3,500 for the course itself, but that is TBD. So please allow us to figure out the final cost, including ways that we can figure out subsidizing the cost for students. But there is going to be, we're also figuring out the process for students to reach out and to apply for it. But that is going to be in early spring. So look out for more. That is a light. Look out for more information. Oh, that's it. There is, we're also expanding the sites that we're going to be going to. I know, very exciting. We're going to be hitting the beach, which is, England beach is not like it's not the Caribbean, it is England beach. So different. It's still gorgeous, but not, anyway, it's, So we're going to be, as we are going to be hitting the moors, that was a very popular site from last year. Manchester, we're going to be spending extra time in Manchester. We didn't spend enough time in Manchester last time, so we're going to be spending extra time in Manchester, spending more time on the moors, and we're going to be hitting as far as we know at this stage in the game, we're going to be hitting 2 coastal sites, Scarborough and Robin Hood's Bay. Obviously, the Lake District and Kiplin Hall, our two mainstays for the trip itself. But we are now kind of thinking about coastal spots. So it's gonna be a blast, everybody. So we've got the moors, the beach, the city, and Kiplin Hall. It's gonna be awesome, guys. Come on down. No threats of exposure, also, too, I promise. And hiking, yes, as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, Vicki. Actually, I think they put an escalator there on that hike. I think there's no. They've taken care of that. You're in a real place, and one of the differences that you might note on a trip like this is that there aren't sort of the protections against one's own carelessness that one might expect. Like there are no sort of guardrails at the edge of the cliff. They just assume you're smart enough to stay back from the edge of the cliff, and so that is that's something that we would also count on.
Yes.
There are also a couple of courses that I'll mention here at the college that play into the trip. Dr. Gillen's course on the English Romantics has already been mentioned. I'll also be teaching a creative writing workshop in travel writing, so that's not the whole course, that's not the whole experience or the whole project. Obviously. There are other things to be garnered in other locales, but those are 2 fragments of it that you might avail yourself of. I would like now to open the floor to questions that any of you might have, whether they are from about the trip last year, in which case I'm sure Professor Goodhart, Vicki Beth, and me and Mackenzie, everyone, all of us would be happy to discuss, or questions about the trip to come. Anything at all? Yes.
When is the application due? Has there been a set date for that?
Early spring. It has not been set yet. I'm guessing February.
Yeah. I'm under the impression that the faculty and staff are going to be collaborating as to when we're going to be opening it up, but it's honestly at the very top of the spring semester, start to look out for either another info session and or like a blast out for here are the applications. So at the very top of the spring semester of that information. Hi, guys.
Yes, in the front.
What is the application process going to be like?
So last year, we had an application process where it consisted of a small essay, and in the topic of the essay was your. So the goal of the 2024, and it's going to be a little different, but the goal of the 2024 program was to think about how students can think through interdisciplinary
how their perspective is an interdisciplinary one, like how their own particular unique perspective, either environmental sciences or history, can shape the way that we think through like interdisciplinary conversations. And that was actually really useful and fruitful. And I like the idea of potentially engaging once again with those kinds of questions about how their specific discipline can speak to others, especially since we are utilizing the strengths of each of the signature centers to have a conversation within the English department. But within the context of what that will look like in terms of an application process, we have not formally decided. But we will let you know, Katie.
It will probably involve Google Docs. Other questions? Yes, right.
How much hiking is on the actual upcoming trip?
More than last year.
Yeah.
Less than
That answered my
less than in the decades previous, probably. Although it is, yeah, that is also TBD. We are looking to have one longer hike, one several-hour hike, a bit across the moors, which is flatter, and generally, if the weather is okay, less strenuous maybe than some of the hikes up the gills, up the mountains. But yeah, there will be some. Other questions? So one more hand? No? We good?
I have an answer.
Please.
I know some students are interested in the Star Center's Explore America summer internships or the summer internships, externships that are available through CES and elsewhere on campus. And last summer we had a few questions from applicants about whether they could do both. And I don't want to speak on behalf of CES, but on behalf of the Star Center, you are totally welcome to apply for both. And in fact, Kiplin did both, and her host institution for Explore America was delighted to have her going off to England for a week. And I think this year with the earlier start date, it'll be even easier. So don't be dissuaded from applying for both.
Excellent.
Yeah, not at all. And that was one of the reasons for the earlier start date was let's get you back in time for June start with internships. Yep.
Wonderful. Yeah, so that applies then to all three of the centers. Thank you, Adam, for bringing that up. That's a good point. And all of those internship programs are pretty extraordinary. If you're not familiar with them, I would encourage you to look them up. Anything else? Other questions? No? We good? All right, there's food in the kitchen. Please go have some, and thank you for coming out. Thanks again to our leaders. Good night.
Good job, Mr. Nancy. Well done, sir.